45 years ago, a talented Las Vegas radar engineer vanished without a trace on his own yacht, in the middle of Lake Mead, leaving his family in despair. The boat was found drifting silently, lights still on, half-full glasses of wine, the radio midway through a jazz tune, but no one on deck. Authorities suspected the brunette woman seen with him that night was involved, but with no body found and almost no clues to pursue, the investigation quickly hit a dead end. However, for over 4 decades, a group of detectives never gave up, believing the truth was still somewhere at the bottom of the lake. Then one day, while re-examining forgotten evidence in storage, a technician discovered a crucial detail that everyone before had overlooked. A tiny detail that was enough to change the entire case and shock the Las Vegas community. Before diving into this mysterious story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love cold cases solved after decades, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part. Las Vegas, the night of November 22nd, 1963. Wind from the desert blew across Lake Mead, rustling into the masts and making them creak softly like a sigh. The Lake Mead Yacht Club dock was silent, with only a few dim lights casting down onto the water. Robert Hale's yacht, the Azure Star, the vessel he still hand-maintained every weekend, left the dock just as dusk fell. The last witness to see him was the dock attendant, who said Hale wore a gray coat, carried a paper bag with wine, and was accompanied by a brunette woman in a black dress. She was tall and slender, wearing a sparkling necklace that glittered under the lights. The two didn't talk much, just smiled faintly at each other as they crossed the gangway before the cabin door closed. From afar, a few night shift sailors heard the faint jazz music echoing from inside, then all sounds faded into silence. All night, the lights in the Azure Star's cabin stayed dimly on, drifting quietly amid the still waters. No one left the dock, and no other boats moved nearby. The next morning, Las Vegas greeted dawn in the pale light of winter desert. Mrs. Martha Hale woke up in their suburban Henderson home, seeing the empty bed beside her, the alarm clock already reading 8 o'clock. She was used to her husband calling if he stayed on the boat overnight, but today the phone was silent. Trying to stay calm, she called his office at Nellis Air Force Base. The staff said Mr. Hale hadn't arrived. She tried calling the yacht. No one picked up, just the static hum of the line connected to the marina. By then, a bad feeling began to tighten in her chest. She grabbed her car and drove straight to Lake Mead. At the dock, the water was flat as glass, with only thin streaks of light scattered across it. The Azure Star was still in its spot, swaying lightly in the wind, silent, no one on deck. The cabin door was shut tight, the lights inside still flickering. She called out her husband's name loudly, no response. The dock attendant followed behind, banging hard on the hull, but only an empty echo came back. Everything was too quiet, too clean, as if the boat had never had anyone stay overnight. Martha stood frozen on the gangway, clutching her purse tightly. She looked around, then gasped, pulling out the payphone next to the dock, her voice choking between breaths. "I need to report to the police. My husband is missing." Mrs. Martha Hale's voice was still trembling when the first Metro Las Vegas Police Department patrol car sped to the Lake Mead dock in the cold, foggy morning. The sky wasn't fully light yet, the silver dawn light reflecting off the anchored boats, making the lake look like it was covered in a silent layer of metal. She stood huddled by the wooden railing, clutching her wool scarf tightly, her eyes following every movement. Her husband's Azure Star still drifted lightly at the end of the dock, cabin door shut tight, cabin lights flickering dimly. When the first 2 officers boarded, the clack of their boot heels echoed chillingly in the still space. One banged hard on the door, calling Mr. Hale's name, but only the waves answered. After a few failed attempts to open it, they exchanged quick words and pried the hinges with an iron bar. The door burst open with a dry screech that made Mrs. Martha jump. A gust of air rushed out, thick with the smell of wine and metal, mixed with the sharp tang of cigarettes and dampness from the carpet. The space inside seemed frozen after an unfinished evening. The desk lamp still glowed faintly, the radio emitting intermittent static. The wall clock's hand stopped at 11:42. On the table, two half-full wine glasses. The wine thickened into dark red streaks around the rims. One glass had a lipstick mark, the other clear fingerprints. Beside them, an ashtray held two cigarette butts, one Marlboro, the other a slim, scented Virginia Slims. In the middle of the carpet, right by the table leg, was a small, charred syringe tip, lying tilted as if dropped. The early light streamed through the window, glinting off the needle's silver point, casting a thin streak of light on the wall. One officer crouched down, whispering, "Don't touch it, let forensics handle it." The other nodded faintly, stepping back. The air in the cabin hung heavy, filled only with the radio's murmur and the scratch of pens on notepads. Everything was unusually neat. No broken items, no overturned chairs, no signs of struggle. A long brown hair caught on the edge of the leather chair, curling along the stitching, and in the dim light, it gleamed with a faint copper sheen. The cop picked it up with tweezers, his eyes narrowing slightly. "A woman was here," he said, stating what everyone already sensed. The door to the bedroom was locked from inside, forcing them to pry it. Inside was a small space, bed flat, blankets neatly folded, a half-reyered novel, and Mr. Hale's glasses on the bedside table. Wallet, wristwatch, wedding ring, all in place, nothing taken. The gray coat he'd worn the night before still hung neatly behind the door, still smelling of men's cologne. One officer muttered softly, almost disbelieving, if he left, he didn't take anything with him. In the corner, an empty leather suitcase stood slightly open, containing only a few unfinished technical papers. A small family photo of the Hales lay on the floor, probably fallen when someone bumped the table. Outside, the wind began to pick up, scattering the last wisps of fog. Detective Carl Stevens, who led the investigation team, had just arrived. He stepped onto the deck, hat shading his eyes, lean build, deep-set eyes behind dark glasses. He asked nothing, just leaned down to peer through the open door. "No signs of a fight, no theft," one officer reported. Stevens strode straight into the cabin, sweeping his flashlight along the walls. The beam stopped at a dark circular stain on the carpet near the table leg. He knelt, touched it lightly, then sniffed, wine mixed with metal. "Don't wipe it, leave it." He stood, surveying the room, eyes lingering on the two wine glasses, the hair, the syringe. "Lights on all night?" he asked. The dock attendant nodded. "Yes, sir, from when they left until morning." Stevens gazed out the window, where the lake brightened in the young sunlight. The yacht swayed slowly, reflecting cold silver. No footprints on the deck. Mooring lines intact, gangway dry. No one had left the boat in that misty night. He stepped outside, squinting at the quiet waters around. Other cops had launched a rescue boat, preparing for divers to check the lake bottom. The water was eerily flat, mirroring the pale sky like a glass pane. Stevens stood still for a moment, listening to the ripples lapping against the hull, eyes still fixed afar. "If he left," he said softly, "then the water must know it." No one replied. Only the wind whistling through the mooring lines, the clink of metal pipes bumping, and somewhere in the cabin, the radio suddenly crackled a short musical note before cutting off. The only sound left in the morning when that man vanished without a trace. The sky over Lake Mead was overcast, the noon light casting a shimmering mercury gleam on the water. The lake remained inexplicably calm, while on the dock, officers set up temporary barriers around the Azure Star's mooring area. A small white van marked LAS Vegas, Metro Crime Lab, rolled up, its tires crunching dryly on the gravel. Two forensic technicians stepped out, carrying metal toolboxes, camera tripods, and scene-measuring tapes. Detective Carl Stevens waited on the deck, eyes still on the distant water where the sun glared blindingly at the horizon. "Start with the cabin," he said, voice even hoarse and tired. The yacht door still ajar from morning, inside the air less thick, but still faintly scented with wine and polished wood. Technician Miller, short and silver-haired, loaded black and white film into his Rolleiflex camera and began photographing methodically from every angle. He panned the lens slowly, capturing the wine table, ashtray, radio, floor carpet, cabin door, and even the light streak on the wall where sunlight hit. The shutter clicks sounded steadily, interspersed with the radio's intermittent static. Behind him, his colleague dusted white powder over the glass stems, gently lifting each wine glass from the table, tilting under the light. Faint fingerprints emerged on the surfaces. 2 different sets, the technician said, voice slightly surprised. One set large, thick and long fingers, male. The other small, short, fine ridges, female. They marked positions, tagged evidence, then placed both glasses in sealed bags. On the tabletop, they found more dried wine smears, dark and sticky. A wine drop on the carpet reflected light like diluted blood. When pulling out the chair, Miller crouched and paused, under the chair leg by the wooden frame, a dried reddish-brown streak, small, round and old. He dabbed it lightly with a cotton swab. Blood, Stevens said softly. Not much, but enough to prove someone had been scratched or bled in the cabin. He turned to his assistant, signaling to note the location. To the right of the chair, on the light-colored leather, a tiny dark brown speck, nearly invisible without magnification. Miller angled his flashlight, the beam revealing a small circular streak. Could be blood splatter or spray from injecting, he said. Stevens stood behind, eyes narrowing. He remembered Hale was right-handed, yet the injection mark was on the inside of the left arm, a detail that left him silent for a long time. If he was an addict, the habit of injecting with the dominant hand would be ingrained. But here, the needle mark was precisely in a spot convenient for someone else to administer, not self-injection. No one said more, but everyone's eyes had already fixed on that detail. In the cabin corner, the charred syringe was placed on a steel tray, needle tip blackened from flame. A residue of drug clung dry around the barrel, turned pale yellow. Next to it, a small fabric scrap caught on the table edge, a shred of black silk, fine threads, possibly from the accompanying woman's dress. The technician carefully picked it up with tweezers, placing it in a sealed envelope. No one spoke it aloud, but each item they collected thickened the cabin air like cigarette smoke. A young cop filming quietly muttered, "No theft, nothing missing, just signs of 2 people, then empty." Stevens didn't reply, just stood silently gazing at the chair where Hale had sat. His eyes lingered briefly on the wine glass, still gleaming red, then shifted to the shut-off radio. He paced slowly around the cabin, footsteps so light, only the floor creaked faintly. In the light streaming from the window, fine dust swirled as he gently opened the small aft deck door. Wind from outside rushed in, carrying cold moisture. "Don't let the wind carry anything away," he reminded softly. Then turned to survey the entire cabin. Everything was like a stage after the curtain fell. Props still in place, but the actors gone. When the technicians finished photographing, each item was packaged, labeled, location noted. The 2 wine glasses, syringe, hair strand, silk scrap, Rolleiflex film were placed together in a sealed wooden box. Stevens leaned out onto the deck, taking a deep breath, the lake's cold wind sharpening his senses. Far off, the water gleamed silver, so still it was impossible to guess that last night it had been the boundary between life and death. He looked back at the boat one last time before the forensics team left. On the hull, sunlight reflected the words Azure Star like a thin, cold, indelible gash. The next noon, the sky over Lake Mead opened into a milky white haze, thin veils of vapor drifting lazily. Seagulls skimmed low over the water, occasionally dipping then wheeling up at the sound of the rescue team's engines approaching the Azure Star. After police completed forensics, the area around the yacht was cordoned off, and Clark County dive team rescuers began the search. They brought iron hooks, ropes, and bottom-sweeping nets. The command boat anchored about 20 yards from the yacht, engine rumbling low and steady, the water rippling lightly. Detective Carl Stevens stood on the deck, binoculars in hand, watching the black-suited divers gradually disappear into the cold water. Pairs of divers descended along cables, each with waterproof flashlights and long steel hooks. Under the lake bottom, the water was icy cold, light barely penetrating beyond 5 meters. They groped along the mooring map, sweeping slowly in a radius over 50 yards around the yacht. Cables tautened, waves rippled across the surface, occasional metal clangs mixing with the wind. On deck, a communications officer monitored air gauges, occasionally calling down via radio, voice distorted in the static. 1 hour passed. In the murky gray water, they saw only debris, glass bottles, dry leaves, a rusted tin can. No human traces. At 12 meters depth, a diver spotted a floating fabric patch, but when hauled up, it was just an old tarp. They rotated for 4 more dives, expanding to near Boulder Beach shore, but results remained empty. No body, no heavy objects suggesting sinking near the boat area. On shore, Stevens walked the sandy strip, shoes soaked heavy with lake water. He crouched to examine every mark imprinted on the wet sand. Near the gangway were men's shoe prints, clear, thick soles, the kind of work boots an engineer like Hale often wore. Footprints ran along the dock edge, then stopped right at the mooring line. No smaller parallel prints, no high heels, no skids or collisions. The sand was flat, as if only one person had passed. He stood still, gazing along the water's edge, wind whipping his coattails, eyes squinting in the sun. If she had gone with him last night, how did she leave without a trace? Across the way, the tech team swept more with steel nets, dropped from the side. After a few hauls, the net snagged something, clanging sharply. Everyone pulled it up. In the net, water dripped steadily, revealing another syringe, tip broken, needle worn, moss clinging to the barrel. A technician carefully extracted it, placing it in a clean water container. Stevens approached, examining closely. The needle matched the one found in the cabin, same size, same medical etching, P. Mexico. He paused for seconds, then said, "Don't discard it, send it to the lab." The rescue team continued sweeping for 2 more hours, but found nothing else besides old rope scraps. In the afternoon, sun slanted through the red rock walls around the lake, casting long streaks like winding fire trails. The Azure Star yacht, still moored there, silent as a stubborn witness, reflecting its silver hull on the water. Mrs. Martha Hale sat in her car, peering through the fogged window. She wasn't crying anymore, just holding an empty gaze toward the boat. Stevens approached, tapping lightly on the doorframe, voice slow but firm. "We haven't found a body yet, ma'am, but I promise we won't stop." She nodded, then bowed her head. As the sun set, the search team packed equipment. On the command boat, Stevens jotted a few quick lines in his notebook, then closed it. He turned for a final look at the lake. The surface mirrored the fiery sunset glow, but it was only false calm. In his gut, something still felt off. An unsolved void, a man vanished, a woman traceless, and now another syringe floating up from the dark. That evening, the preliminary report was sent to Metro Las Vegas headquarters. In the assessment section, the ink-black line was chillingly concise: victim Robert Hale, missing, possible death. The next day's Las Vegas sky was tinged with pale yellow desert dust. Thin clouds raced by, exposing harsh sunlight glaring down on the sparkling Lake Mead. News of radar engineer Robert Hale's disappearance spread through the marina area, and the first person called for questioning was Frank Doyle, the dock attendant that night. He arrived at police headquarters in his dark green uniform, face gaunt after a sleepless night. Before him sat Detective Carl Stevens, open case file, thick notebook, and neatly placed pencil. "Mr. Doyle, tell us everything you saw that night, from when Mr. Hale arrived." Frank sat silent for seconds, hands clenched, eyes distant as if pulling back memories. "Around 8:30 at night, I saw him drive up, his usual gray Ford. He wasn't alone. A girl was with him. Brown hair, black dress, about 5'6", slim build. She didn't say anything, just smiled hello as they passed the guard shack. I still remember the necklace sparkling on her neck, reflecting the lights like gold. Stevens continued calmly. Did you hear them talk? Doyle shook his head. Not clearly. They spoke softly, seemed intimate. Mr. Hale laughed, and the girl leaned on the railing while he untied the mooring. Then I saw them enter the cabin, and by midnight, just the lights on. The next morning? No one. Boat still in place. Doyle inhaled faintly, voice hoarse. If she came back to shore, I'd have seen. No one left the boat that night, sir. Stevens closed the notebook, nodding slightly. The answers matched what he'd anticipated. The brunette woman was the only remaining link from the night of disappearance. He sent men to the Flamingo Hotel, where Hale had stopped that evening. The night bartender, Ricky Mahone, greeted them in the dim bar light. The scent of cigarettes and swing music still lingered, though the place was empty. Stevens placed a black and white photo of Hale on the counter. Did you see this man here on the 22nd? Ricky glanced, nodding immediately. Yeah. He sat right at this bar, with a young woman. I remember because they ordered odd drinks, a gin and tonic, and a brandy with honey. She had brown hair, black dress, model-like figure. I even joked. You two look like a perfect match, and he just smiled. They left around 9, heading to the back parking lot. Stevens raised an eyebrow. Did you hear her name? Ricky frowned, trying to recall. Think it was Allison, yeah. He called her Allie once, when she lifted her glass. Leaving the hotel, Stevens paused in the lobby. Neon lights reflecting on the pink stone floor. He looked out at the street, cars flowing under the blinking, "Welcome to fabulous Las Vegas" sign. The name Allison echoed in his mind, like an unfinished melody. That afternoon, he went to Nellis Air Force Base, where Hale worked, to question colleagues. In the engineering room, a young bespectacled man handed him a note. Hale left that Friday. 8 p.m. Meet AT, Flamingo Lounge. Who could AT be? Stevens asked. The engineer shrugged. No idea, he was always secretive. But the last few weeks he'd leave the office early. Once he said he was meeting someone very different. Stevens jotted AT in his notebook, pressing hard as if to etch it deep. That evening, he returned to Lake Mead Yacht Club to review the dock logbook. The November 22nd page had a scrawled signature, the last entry in blue ink, AT guest pass. He stared at the line for a long moment, then slowly closed the book. The clues began fitting together like shattered glass pieces. The brunette woman named Allison, the AT signature, and Hale's AT note, all pointing to the same person. Las Vegas night fell again. Casino lights from afar, casting blurry streaks in the sky. Stevens sat in his small office. Before him a ray of crime scene photos, 2 wine glasses, the syringe, the brown hair. He turned on the desk lamp, golden light falling on the weathered face of a man accustomed to unsolved vanishings. He lit a cigarette, smoke curling around his head, then placed the hair photo next to the AT signature. Outside the window, a distant train whistle echoed, mingling with the desert night wind. The next morning, the search warrant file opened. The first line on the clacking typewriter printed order emerged clearly on the paper. Subject, Allison Teague, female, approx. 25, brunette. Occupation dancer, Stardust Lounge. A missing person case now had a face, a name. And for Stevens, it was no longer a lake accident, but the starting point for a pursuit that would stretch nearly half a century. In the harsh Las Vegas noon sun, Detective Carl Stevens pushed open the door to the Stardust Lounge nightclub, freshly cleaned after last night's show. The scent of perfume, cigarette smoke, and pink lights lingered in the air like the echo of an unextinguished stage. A poster on the wall caught his eye immediately, a brunette girl in a shimmering black dress, lips curved in a faint smile, eyes slightly downcast as if hiding something. Below the photo, small print, Allison Teague, Tuesday, Thursday nights. The club manager, Lou Morales, counted cash while smoking, eyeing Stevens wearily. She quit on the 23rd. Didn't say a word, just left her dressing room key and walked out. I figured she took another gig in Reno, Stevens asked. Any issues with her? Morales sighed. She'd been off the last few weeks. Gaunt, sunken eyes, quiet, often left with rich regular customers. One I remember clear, an engineer, tall, graying hair, polite, always waited for her at the bar. He paused a beat, as if recalling. Name was Robert, yeah, Robert Hale. She called him Rob. Stevens looked around the room, the empty stage, chairs and tables neatly stacked, no traces of the previous night, he said softly. She left Vegas right the morning after he disappeared. Lou nodded. That's right. Someone saw her at the bus station at 7 a.m., carrying a small suitcase. The neon lights flickering overhead made Stevens's eyes sting. He left his business card behind and stepped out onto the street, where desert wind carried the hot scent of dust mixed with gasoline. That afternoon, he went to Allison's old apartment on Charleston Street. The two-story building was faded silver, curtains drawn tight. The landlady, Evelyn, with silver hair and a raspy voice, was surprised to hear the girl's name. She lived here 3 months, paid on time. Quiet, but men often came to pick her up. I once heard her arguing with one, caught the name Dean faintly. The next day, she came home crying, then went silent. A month later, she moved out. Stevens stepped into the empty room. On the table, a thin layer of dust covered the mirror, reflecting the weak yellow light from the hallway. By the bed were a few leftover items. A comb with brown hairs, an empty perfume bottle, and a black and white photo of Allison taken with an unfamiliar man. The man's face was familiar in an unsettling way. It was Dean Ryle, the jazz musician who played in the Fremont area, who had died from heroin 2 months earlier. That evening, Stevens went to the bar where Dean had performed. The trumpet blared, mingling with cigarette smoke and hoarse laughter. An old drummer remembered immediately. Dean and that girl were inseparable. They rented a room together nearby, but he died suddenly. Police said overdose. I don't buy it. Dean wasn't the type. That day, only she was with him. He paused, tapping his cigarette on the glass rim. She cried hysterically, but left the city the next day. The stories connected, making Stevens feel like he was walking through the same scene again. A tidy room, unfinished wine glasses, a missing syringe, a dead man, and the brunette girl vanishing into the morning mist. 2 months later, the script repeated, only this time, the man didn't die in the bedroom, but disappeared in the middle of Lake Mead. He returned to his office, sitting amid a pile of black and white photos spread on the table. Dean Ryle slumped by the bed, Robert Hale missing. And in between, the photo of Allison, her gaze piercing through the lens, half gentle, half challenging. Stevens picked up the photo, turning it under the light. There was something unusual about the girl, a serene face. But in those deep eyes was an emptiness he'd seen in many addicts, a mix of recklessness and fear. He didn't know who Allison really was, a beautiful woman drawn into dangerous men, or the pretty little storm herself pulling them into the darkness. But one thing he knew for sure, both men ended the same way, in the same kind of silence. The next morning, as Las Vegas sunlight pierced through the thin curtains, Stevens returned to Lake Mead. The Azure Star yacht was still moored there, as silent as the first day he'd set foot on it. The water reflected cold silver light. He lit a cigarette, smoke drifting in the wind. 2 men, same woman, he muttered. One dead, one missing, and she vanished between the 2 deaths. He squinted out at the lake, where sunlight blurred in the mist. In his mind, the name Allison Teague stood out as clearly as a bolded mark on a page, fragile, dangerous, and certainly no coincidence. That night, Carl Stevens still hadn't gone home. In his small office, the black and white photos were spread across the table. Robert Hale's face faded under the desk lamp. Next to it, the photo of Dean Ryle, slumped by the bed with a dry blood streak at the elbow. 2 different men, two different worlds, but their endings matched down to the details. One a government engineer, one a musician playing in small bars, and both died or vanished right after appearing with the same woman named Allison Teague. Stevens inhaled deeply, his finger touching the photo. In both scenes, the wine table clean, glasses half full, charred syringe, no signs of struggle or fight, just silence and neatness, the silence of those who had witnessed death many times and learned how to erase traces afterward. He recalled the coroner's words about Dean: heroin levels in the blood 3 times the lethal dose. Injection precise enough that only someone experienced many times would know the needle spot. And Hale: no addiction history, no old marks, but a single injection wound on the left arm, while he was right-handed. Those men weren't the type to turn to heroin to forget life. Someone injected them, Stevens thought, and that person knew exactly how to turn the dose into a weapon. In the morning, he drove to Dean's old building on Fremont Street, where casino lights still flickered, even in daylight. The elderly boarding house owner looked at him with tired eyes. That girl came to report to the police when Dean died, cried a lot, then vanished. The room was spotless, like no one had lived there. As Stevens stepped into the room, the smell of dampness and rubbing alcohol still lingered. The bed was made, white sheets, only a dark stain on the wall, possibly spilled wine or dried blood. On the table, a round black burn mark like from a cigarette tip or a heated needle end. He stood still for a moment, the image of the Azure Star cabin flashing in his mind. Same wine table, same syringe, same woman vanishing into the early mist. That afternoon, Stevens met again with someone who knew both Dean and Allison, the old drummer from the old club. He sat smoking in the shade, voice raspy like sand wind. Dean said she was helping him quit. She brought some new stuff, said it would feel better. The next day he was dead. Stevens asked, "Do you know where she went?" The drummer shrugged. "I just remember her saying she wanted a new life, but people like her never change anything." As the sun set, Stevens drove back to Lake Mead. The water reflected the deep red sunset, low-flying birds slicing through the space. He stood on the dock, looking at the Azure Star still moored in place, its hull gleaming silver in the evening light. In his mind, 2 images overlapped: Dean slumped by the bed, Hale leaning on the chair, both with the same dangling hand, same needle mark, same quiet death without noise. Allison Teague was the invisible thread connecting them, beautiful, young, and knowing exactly when to vanish. Stevens needed no more reports or notes. It all pointed to one obvious thing: someone was killing with a perfect heroin dose that looked just like an accident. But in the real world, no accident repeats twice with the same woman. He gripped the dock railing tightly, eyes on the darkening water. If Hale had really died like Dean, then his body was still somewhere down there, cold and silent, like what she left behind. The next day, Stevens submitted the file to his superiors. Not to close the case, but to keep it alive a little longer in the system. Long enough that if someone found a clue, they'd know where to start. In the archive category, the final line appeared in the case classification: Robert Hale, suspicious missing. But for Stevens, there was no doubt anymore. To him, the woman named Allison Teague was not just a witness. She was the shadow standing between 2 deaths. The one who had learned to mix wine, jazz music, and a heroin dose to turn truth into perfect illusion. The Clark County Evidence Storage Room was tucked behind the police headquarters, a gray concrete building without signage, its thick iron door like a bank vault. Inside, hundreds of wooden shelves ran along narrow aisles, each stacked with wooden boxes, paper envelopes, and faded sealed bags. The smell of old paper, disinfectant, and wood dust mingled, stifling but familiar to those who worked there. One winter afternoon in 1964, Carl Stevens personally signed the final report for the Robert Hale case: suspicious missing. He watched the forensics technician seal the evidence box: 2 glass wine glasses wrapped in brown paper, a charred syringe, a long brown hair stuck to a cardboard slide, a black silk scrap, and a stack of black and white crime scene film photos. Everything was placed carefully in the wooden box, sealed with red wax, tagged with lead seals. The label code printed, case number Hale 6345. Stevens signed his name one last time, then closed the file. He stood watching the box carried to aisle 3, bin D. The sound of the metal cabinet slamming shut felt as heavy as the final note of a song. All that remained of Robert Hale was now contained in one silent square foot. Outside, Lake Mead still sparkled under the sun, people gradually forgetting the name that had been on the front page for a few weeks. And Las Vegas life continued spinning around red lights and gambling sounds. Many years passed, but Stevens remained haunted. Every time he drove past Lake Mead, he pulled over, gazing out at the vast water, trying to imagine Hale's final moments, the unfinished jazz tune, the cabin lights swaying faintly, and the brunette woman vanishing into the night. He didn't believe Hale injected himself, didn't believe she left the boat before he died. Once, a colleague asked why he kept the case number in his shirt pocket. He simply replied, "Because the lake doesn't speak, but it doesn't forget either." In October 1973, when Clark County headquarters relocated, hundreds of files were transferred to storage. In the shipping manifest, Hale 6345 was listed on line 271, the blue ink smudged, but still readable. The evidence box was loaded onto the truck, with dozens of others. Thefts, robberies, murders, all tied down with ropes and covered with a thick tarp. As the guard closed the truck doors, Stevens stood watching, hands in pockets, feeling like he was seeing off a part of himself. In 1975, Stevens retired after over 30 years in the force. On his last day in the office, he took a leather-bound notebook, in which he recorded unsolved cases. On the final page, amid slanted handwriting lines, he left a single note for the Hale case. No one left the boat before he died. The short sentence, unsigned, unexplained, but enough to make anyone reading it later pause. Time rolled on, as if the 1963 disappearance was just a faded anecdote among hundreds of city cases. In 1986, Clark County built a new storage facility in suburban Henderson. The old file boxes were transferred again, neatly stacked in numbered containers. New staff opened each box for inventory, many exhibits decayed, seals peeling. But when reaching bin D, shelf 3, the Hale 6345 box still had intact red wax, lead seals perfectly closed, paper label yellowed, but Stevens' handwriting clear. The young archivist skimmed the description. Evidence from missing case, Lake Mead, 1963. No body, no suspect. He replaced the box on the shelf, unaware that inside it was the key to a secret dormant for nearly half a century. Months and years connected, the people involved in the case gradually leaving the world. Lake Mead changed with the seasons. Water receding, exposing muddy strips and cracked red rocks. The Azure Star yacht was hauled ashore, tarped, then auctioned to a small boat owner. They stripped the interior, replaced the engine, but no one knew that place had once been the scene of a death never acknowledged. By the late 2000s, Clark County began digitizing old files. Amid dusty case codes, a young technician scrolled past Hale 6345 on the inventory list. He didn't know that when reopening that box, 45 years of the lake silence would soon end, and Stevens' single note, "No one left the boat before he died," would become the most accurate prophecy of his entire career. In April 2008, Las Vegas was no longer the city of hazy neon lights and quiet yacht marinas from 40 years before. Skyscrapers of glass reflecting the sun had risen on the desert, but on the edge of Henderson, in the old Clark County warehouse, the past still lay intact in dusty wooden crates. The federal cold case DNA program had just launched, aiming to review evidence never tested with modern DNA technology. Hundreds of file boxes were pulled from the shadows, reopened for the first time in decades. Amid aisle 3, bin dead, technician Megan Alvarez bent down to read the yellowed label. It read faintly, Case number Hale 6345, Lake Mead, 1963. She paused. The name rang a bell from training sessions. Engineer missing on a yacht, no body, no suspect. She brushed off the thick dust, smelling old red wax and sun-baked paper. The box was still perfectly sealed with lead tags. Stephen's handwriting etched clear. As the knife sliced through the wax, a puff of old damp air escaped, the scent of time mixed with faint wine. Inside, the exhibits were still carefully wrapped in brown paper bags. 2 glass glasses, a charred syringe tube, a black fabric scrap, several black and white photos of the Azure Star cabin, and a small envelope containing a long brown hair. Megan carefully donned gloves, opening the envelope. The hair was dry, brittle but with the root intact, the medulla strand unbroken. To her, that was rare. Most old biological evidence was ruined by time. "Maybe we just got lucky," she whispered, then gently placed the hair on a glass slide, illuminating under the scope. Pale blue light filtered through the lens, highlighting the thin medulla like a thread. She knew if anything could revive this case, it was that fragile thing lying on the table. Megan next took the 2 wine glasses from the sealed bags. On the stems, a faint dust layer remained, but the rims might still hold biological traces, a red lipstick streak, and some clinging epithelial cells. She swabbed samples from both, numbered them, then fed them into the DNA extraction chamber. As the machine ran, the screen displayed ASTR analysis. Processing. That evening, the lab was quiet. Only the hum of air compressors and cooling fans. Megan brewed coffee, reopening the original case file. Inside were crime scene photos, clean cabin, 2 wine glasses, red lipstick mark, light streaming from the window. In another photo, a man's shadow bent over the wooden table, Detective Carl Stevens, who had left the strange note 40 years ago. No one left the boat before he died. She looked at the words, shivering. The next morning, the test results appeared. The sample from the hair and the sample from the wine glass yielded the same genetic markers, perfect match, proving they belonged to a single woman. Megan closed her eyes, leaning back in her chair. In that moment, everything strung together: 2 wine glasses, jazz music, sealed cabin, missing man, and a woman never identified. She opened the software linking to the CODIS database, the National DNA Repository. Entering the freshly obtained STR marker sequence, the screen blinked a few times, then stopped, displaying a single result. The text emerged slowly, but chillingly clear. Match found: Allison Teague, Georgia, 1987, drug possession arrest. Megan sat still, gripping her coffee mug tightly, heat spreading through her fingertips. A name from 1963 had just surfaced from the darkness: the brunette woman last seen with Robert Hale on the Azure Star yacht. After 45 years, what Detective Stevens had intuited finally had an answer. No one left that boat that night, except her. She printed the report, signed it, then resealed the evidence envelope, the first time in nearly half a century. On the box corner, a new label added a small line: reopened April 2008, cold case DNA program. As the box was replaced on the shelf, fluorescent lights reflected off the glass, leaving a thin bright streak like a bridge between past and present. And in the silent space of the storage room, it felt as if the old lake had just rippled faintly, as if it too knew the secret at the bottom was about to be named. When the words "match found, Allison Teague, Georgia 1987, drug possession arrest" appeared on the screen, technician Megan Alvarez held her breath. She stared at the blinking DNA sequence, heart pounding. In that instant, nearly half a century of silence in the Hale 6345 file shattered. A name buried by time suddenly returned, as clear as if written yesterday. She quickly printed the results, clipped them into the file, then called the cold case unit office downtown in Las Vegas. "I need to speak to the captain in charge of unsolved files," she said curtly, voice mixing excitement and thrill. "I just found a DNA match in a 1963 case. 3 hours later, the lab's official report was sent via internal system. The detailed description: female DNA sample on glass and hair collected at scene, 100% match with Allison Teague, female, 68 years old, residing in Savannah, Georgia, CODIS profile #GA45827. Under additional notes, Alvarez added the final line: evidence intact, undamaged. Testing validated at highest confidence level. The news reached Las Vegas Metro Police Department that afternoon. In the cold case office, walls hung with maps of old cases, red pins, and connecting strings like spider webs. Captain Paul Sanders finished reading the report, whistling softly. 45 years, he said, and finally we have that woman's name. He turned to the person just assigned to the case, Detective Celia Tran, a Vietnamese-American detective known for her meticulousness and persistence in seemingly unsolvable cases. Celia sat down, opening the old file scanned from microfilm. The yellowed 1963 pages appeared: yacht cabin photos, 2 wine glasses, charred syringe, and Carl Stevens' scrawled note at the file's end. No one left the boat before he died. She touched the words lightly, as if touching a relic from a colleague half a century ahead. I want to recheck all the evidence, she said. The syringe, too. Do we have DNA on it? Alvarez nodded. Yes, I swabbed the needle tip with the new enzymatic scan method. Mixed sample, male and female DNA. The female matches Allison Teague. The answer silenced the room. Not just the wine glasses, but the deadly instrument itself bore biological traces from the same person. That meant Allison had directly held the needle and likely administered that fateful heroin dose to Robert Hale herself. That evening, Celia took the file home. She spread the photos across the kitchen table, yellow light illuminating the paper. Each was a slice of the past: wine glasses reflecting cabin light, Hale's limp hand, the radio cut midway. She reread witness Frank Doyle's statement, then the report on Dean Ryle, the musician dead 2 months before Hale's case, also from heroin overdose, also with Allison Teague beside him. She sat still for a moment, shivering at the perfect coincidence that couldn't be random. The next day, at the first investigation team meeting, Celia presented briefly: 2 cases, same woman. 1 dead in a bedroom, 1 missing in the lake. Both involved pure heroin, rare in the U.S., in 1963. She survived, vanished, and now lives in Georgia. Captain Sanders leaned on the table. For 45 years no one knew where she was. Now we do. The rest is proving what she did. Celia requested Alvarez run additional comparative analysis between the DNA on the syringe and Hale's old sample in the forensics file. Results came back by week's end. Male sample matches Robert Hale. Female sample matches Allison Teague. Identity probability exceeds 99.99%. A perfect link between victim and suspect, the thread severed for nearly half a century, finally reconnected. That night, Celia drove to Lake Mead. The calm water reflected faint moonlight. Desert wind blew cold, carrying salt and gasoline scents. The Azure Star yacht was now just a rotting wooden frame stored in a dockside shed, covered in faded tarp. She approached, lifting the tarp lightly. Inside, the cabin was bare frame, thick dust, but the shape of 2 facing leather chairs and the wooden table that had been the center of every theory was still recognizable. She stood still, imagining that night, jazz music playing, the man smiling, needle-piercing skin, and the woman quietly leaving before dawn arrived. The next day, the reopened case Hale 6345 order was officially signed. Las Vegas Cold Case Unit began tracking Allison Teague's whereabouts, now 68 years old, living in Savannah, Georgia. The first evidence in 45 years proved the impossible. The woman last seen on the Azure Star was still alive, and Lake Mead's secret was about to be named. In the Las Vegas Police Department's crime lab, the cold blue light from the screen illuminated Detective Celia Tran's face. making her eyes gleam with a metallic hue. Before her, a 3D model of the Azure Star yacht's cabin was gradually emerging on the large screen. Every line, every angle of light reconstructed from the 1963 black and white film photos. She zoomed in on each detail: the wooden table, the 2 wine glasses, the light-colored leather chair, the radio, the slightly ajar deck door. Everything was in its exact position as in the original file that Detective Carl Stevens had preserved. But this time, instead of just static photos, every detail was recreated in digital space, vivid enough to feel the faint yellow lamplight filtering through the fog-salted glass. Celia rotated the model, pausing at the left chair, where Hale was believed to have sat on the night of the disappearance. The position of the left arm, on the armrest, matched the injection site found in the forensics photos. She zoomed in, measuring the angle. "He couldn't have injected himself," she said softly. "If he was right-handed, the needle would have to pierce at a different angle. The injector had to be standing on the left, near the table door." She switched to the real photos. The wine table, pushed slightly off its original position by a few inches. A faint scratch on the wooden floor showed it had been hastily dragged. And the 2 glasses, one with fingerprints wiped faint, the other still bearing a lipstick mark. Celia called technician Alvarez over. "We'll try luminol," she said. They moved to the mock-up room, where objects simulating the cabin were built to scale, from the wine table to the wooden floor. When the lights went out, the room plunged into darkness. Alvarez held the spray bottle, misting the fluorescent solution around the table and chair area. After a few seconds, under the purple light, faint blue glows emerged, circling the table edge, trailing down to the carpet and armrest. Not pooling blood, but traces of cleaning solution or alcohol wipe, something people use to erase fingerprints or microscopic splatters. "Someone cleaned the scene," Alvarez said quietly. "Not just cleaned. She knew exactly where to wipe." Celia eyed the dim glow on the chair armrest, the curve just enough to cover where Hale had leaned, "and knew exactly what to hide," she replied. She returned to the 3D model, inputting the new data. When the simulated light shone again, Celia replayed the final moments of that night. Hale seated on the right chair, the woman standing left of the table, preparing the syringe. The cabin light cast over her shoulder, reflecting off the necklace at her throat. After the injection, she took the wine glass, circled around, wiping handprints, straightening the chair, then heading to the deck. The inner door locked, the outer one ajar, just like the real scene. When the simulation ended, Celia stood still, arms crossed over her chest. In the room, only the computer's hum remained, the blue light flickering on her face. That afternoon, she brought all the results to the office of Prosecutor Lisa Vasquez, who handled special prosecutions. Lisa flipped through photos, graphs, then paused at the luminol glow shot. "How many years, and the traces are still there," she said. Celia nodded. "Because no one dared touch it. They sealed it intact from 1963. If she hadn't wiped, we'd never see the truth." Lisa leaned back in her chair, fingers tapping a rhythm on the desk. "In summary," she said, "we have her DNA on the glass and syringe. The scene shows cleaning marks and evidence that Hale couldn't have injected himself." Celia replied softly, "Enough to build the charge, but not to close it. She's still alive, in Georgia, and I want to hear from her own mouth what happened on that boat that night." Lisa looked at her, eyes sharp as a blade. "I'll sign the federal cooperation order. You fly to Georgia this week." She closed the file, voice deliberate. 45 years of silence. Now it's time for the Azure Star to tell its story. As Celia left the office, dusk was draping Las Vegas in a burnt copper hue. At the far corner of the old Lake Mead dock, the water rippled in the wind, reflecting the fading sunlight like a trailing ribbon of fire. Beneath that lake, where Stevens had stood 40 years before, the truth had just escaped the mud of time, blue cold, but unable to be buried any longer. In March 2008, the old oak trees in suburban Savannah, Georgia, began sprouting tender leaves, casting a soft golden light over the small street in front of Allison Teague's white wooden house. 45 years after the Lake Mead night, the once brunette woman was now 68. She lived alone, quietly, tending 2 cats and volunteering part-time at a local library. Neighbors described her as a polite woman, a bit solitary, never mentioning the past. But behind that silent wooden wall, the past was stirring. At the FBI's Atlanta field office, Detective Celia Tran sat beside Federal Agent Mark Hensley, reviewing the newly signed cooperation file between the Las Vegas Metro Cold Case Unit and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI. On the screen was a recent photo of Allison at the farmer's market. Silver hair, small frame, eyes still sharp. She doesn't know she's being watched, Hensley asked. Celia shook her head. Not yet, and we have to keep it that way. A GBI surveillance team had set up cameras from the house across the street, recording her every movement for 2 weeks. Allison rarely went out, except mornings, only to the market or library, and evenings always sat on the porch reading, with a habit of sipping a small glass of wine before bed. On March 24th, the agents obtained the first physical evidence, a toothbrush from her trash bin. The sample was sealed and rushed to the federal lab in Quantico. Celia monitored the entire process via encrypted feed. 48 hours later, the results appeared on screen. DNA profile. Complete STR match to cold case 6345, Allison Teague. Absolute match probability. No doubt left. The woman living peacefully in the small Savannah house was the one present in the Azure Star cabin in 1963. Celia sat still for a long time, the screen's light casting on her face. She thought of Detective Stevens, of the note he'd left. No one left the boat before he died. And now, after nearly half a century, the only one who had left that boat was finally found. On April 1st, the FBI and GBI held a closed meeting at the Atlanta field office. A map of Savannah lay spread on the table, marking approach routes to the Teague house. 2 entries, a backyard fence, north-facing windows. Captain Hensley pointed. She's elderly, no weapons, but don't get complacent. 45 years on the run isn't coincidence. Celia nodded. I want to make sure she hears exactly why she's being arrested. She needs to understand that night didn't vanish with the years. On April 3, 2008, the arrest warrant was approved by federal court. On the document, the text clear. Arrest warrant, Allison Teague, charge involuntary manslaughter, Robert Hale case, 1963. The red seal of the U.S. Department of Justice, stamped boldly in the upper right. Celia held the original in her hand, feeling as if touching the culmination of half a century's pursuit. The evening before the action, the task force held a quick briefing in a parking lot near Teague's house. 6 agents, split into 2 teams, coordinating with local police. April in Savannah was warm but humid, mist drifting lightly through streetlights. Hensley checked the radio one last time, while Celia leaned against the car, eyes fixed on the house sinking into darkness at the street's end. She caused 2 men to die, she said softly, and the whole city lost 45 years believing otherwise. At 11:14 p.m., the signal went out. Unlit vehicles crept slowly into the narrow street. 1 agent approached the back door. Another flanked the porch. From afar, Celia could still see Allison's silhouette through the window. She sat in a wooden chair, desk lamp illuminating her time-worn face, frail hands lifting a glass of red wine to her lips. At 11:18 p.m., as the agent knocked and shouted, "Federal agents, we have a warrant," Allison turned her head, eyes widening, hand trembling, so the wine spilled onto the carpet. In those brief seconds, everything seemed to pause. The wind, the cat's meow, the door bursting open, and as handcuff number 8 clicked around the silver-haired woman's wrists, Celia stepped onto the porch, the front light clearly illuminating her face. Without a word, both understood the night on the Azure Star had finally traveled its 45-year path to this moment. Savannah's sky was just dawning. The early morning light still mingled with faint mist draping the historic homes along Abercorn Street, where long dangling oak branches swayed in the gentle breeze. At 6:30 a.m., the quiet of the neighborhood was broken only by the slow roll of tires on dew-wet pavement. 6 federal agents and Georgia State Police quietly took positions around the white wooden house at 412, where Allison Teague had lived for over 20 years. Inside the house, the kitchen light had just flicked on, the elderly woman's silhouette flickering through the fogged glass pane. The signal buzzed in earpieces. Detective Celia Tran, standing by the neighbor's gate, nodded. Execute. 2 agents advanced to the front door, warrant with red stamp in hand, a third circling to the back. A sharp knock echoed in the morning stillness. FBI. Open the door. We have an arrest warrant. Inside, a brief silence. Then the bolt clicked, slow and dry. The door cracked open, and Allison Teague appeared, silver hair neatly pinned, in a light green robe, deep-set eyes meeting theirs without a trace of panic. The kitchen's golden light lit her face, etching the wrinkles around her mouth like time's carved knife marks. "Miss Allison Teague?" Agent Hensley asked, voice stern. "Yes," she replied softly. "You are under arrest on a federal warrant for involvement in the death of engineer Robert Hale, case at Lake Mead, Nevada, 1963. No protest, no denial, no questions." She just nodded faintly, her gaze indifferent, as if she'd been waiting for this half her life. As handcuff number 8 tightened on her wrists, she said only one thing, voice calm. "I didn't think you'd still remember." Celia stepped onto the porch, facing the woman she'd seen only through files and old photos for months. "You know exactly why we're here," she said. Allison pursed her lips, her glance flicking over Celia's face then away, as if looking through someone rather than at the officer before her. While the tech team quickly swept the house, on-site forensics collected a toothbrush, wine glass from the table, and old papers. A technician scanned Allison's fingerprints right there with a portable device. Results displayed on screen minutes later. The right index fingerprint matched perfectly with the 1963 evidence sample. Identification confirmed. She was the one who had touched the wine glass on the Azure Star yacht. When asked if she wanted a lawyer present, she replied, "Yes, but not right now." Her voice raspy but firm, unwavering. Police led her from the house. Neighbors stood silent on their porches, none understanding what was happening. They only saw an elderly woman, slow steps, escorted to the car in the dim morning light, hands cuffed, robe fluttering lightly in the wind. The agent vehicle left Savannah at 8 a.m., transporting Allison to the Federal Detention Center in Atlanta for extradition hold. On the road, she gazed through the window, eyes following the receding trees, lips pressed tight. Celia sat opposite, silently observing. She said not a word the entire hundreds of miles journey, only occasionally closing her eyes, as if listening again to sounds from a long-ago Nevada lake night, the jazz fading, the syringe clattering to the floor, and the silence of the man who never woke. On April 5th, the plane carrying Allison Teague landed at McCarran Airport, Las Vegas. She was transferred immediately to Clark County Jail for questioning hold. In the handover log, the all-caps line concise Vegas yacht case reopened. Primary suspect in custody. As Celia signed the final section, she watched the silver-haired woman led down the cold-lit hallway of the detention center. A mix of relief and heaviness washed over her at once. She had fulfilled the promise to the past, reopening the case Carl Stevens couldn't solve, the one he'd insisted. No one left the boat before he died. Now the only one who had left that boat was here in justice's grasp. Outside, Las Vegas had changed. High-rises replaced old casinos, brilliant lights shining down streets where Stevens once gazed at the lake. But amid all the changes, one thing remained constant. The past, no matter how deeply buried, would surface when its time came. And that morning in Savannah, Allison Teague knew her moment had finally arrived. The Clark County interrogation room was stark and cold, fluorescent lights, reflecting off the frosted glass behind Detective Celia Tran's back. On the table lay the thick file marked Case 6345. Robert Hale, reopened 2008. Allison Teague sat opposite, hands clasped, wrists still bearing faint red marks from the cuffs. She wore a gray jail jumpsuit, silver hair tied neatly, face etched with wrinkles, but eyes holding an inscrutable calm. Beside her was her court-appointed attorney David Coleman, placing the tape recorder on the table. The click sounded dry, beginning the first interrogation after 45 years of silence. Celia opened her briefcase, pulling out several old photos laminated in plastic, faded black and white frames, the Azure Star Yacht cabin, 2 wine glasses, radio, light-colored leather chair. Allison looked down slowly. Her fingers trembled slightly as the third photo was flipped. The wine table shot, where a faint red lipstick mark remained on the glass rim. Celia asked the first question, voice even, not harsh. "Do you recognize the room in the photo?" Silence for a moment. The air conditioner hummed. Allison blinked, shoulders tensing slightly. Finally, she nodded, voice raspy and low. "Yes, I was there." Celia met her gaze. "On the night of November 22nd, 1963, you were on the Azure Star Yacht with Mr. Robert Hale. Can you tell us what happened?" Allison inhaled deeply, eyes fixed on the photo, as if peering through time. "He wanted to try it. I told him he'd never done it before, but he said he just wanted to know what it felt like. I had a little with me, for myself," he begged. "And I helped." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't mean to hurt him. I injected only half the dose, less than I used many times. But she swallowed hard. He passed out in seconds. I called, shook him, but he wouldn't wake." Celia kept her tone steady. "What did you do after that?" Allison bowed her head, hands clenching. "I panicked. I thought he was dead. I was so scared. I wiped the glasses, the table, took the syringe away. I know it was stupid, but I'd been through something similar. In Georgia, with Dean." She paused, voice softer. "I couldn't face another body. I just wanted to get out of there." Attorney Coleman placed a hand on her shoulder, signaling to stop, but Allison shook her head, continuing. "I wiped everything. The table marks, the handprints. I locked the inner door, cracked the outer one, then swam to shore. It was cold. I nearly drowned, but I couldn't go back. I thought if they found him, they'd say I killed him." Celia opened her tablet, projecting the scanned fingerprint from the wine glass, 100% match to Allison's. "Did you know your DNA matches on both the glass and the syringe?" She nodded, voice almost a whisper. "I know. I touched them." Celia switched to another photo, the cabin from the opposite angle, light slanting from the lamp. "After leaving the boat, did you return?" "No," Allison replied, eyes welling. "I thought he was dead. I didn't dare look back. The next morning I left Las Vegas. I didn't want to hear any more." The room fell silent. Celia softly hit pause on the recording, poured water into a glass, placed it before her. "You know," she said, "someone kept this case his whole life. He was the first detective on it, Carl Stevens. He wrote in his notebook, 'No one left the boat before he died.' He was right." Allison didn't reply. She just sat still, gaze distant. "I never meant to leave him, but everything happened so fast. I've lived my whole life with that image. Him slumped in the chair, head down, cabin light flickering. I ran, but it never left me. Not one night." Coleman glanced at his watch, signaling it. Celia restarted the recorder, stating clearly, "April 6, 2008, at Clark County Jail. The interviewee is Allison Teague, confirming presence at the Azure Star Yacht scene on the night of November 22, 1963. Statement recorded, attorney present." Allison lifted her head, looking into the small recorder's lens. She spoke softly but clearly. Each word, "I thought he was dead. I didn't dare look back. I was afraid I'd see those eyes open." As the interrogation ended, Celia stood, gathering the file. Teague was escorted out, her small figure fading down the bright white hallway. Celia eyed the old photo still on the table. The cabin, wine glasses, faint swaying light, then gently folded it. After 45 years, the azure star had finally spoken. And the woman who vanished into the night mist had confirmed herself. She had never truly left. 2 days after the first interrogation, Allison Teague sat in the interrogation room again, face pale, eyes sunken from sleeplessness. On the table was an unopened water bottle, and the recorder in its usual spot. Detective Celia Tran entered, accompanied by Prosecutor Lisa Vasquez. No one spoke for the first few minutes, only the wall clock's steady tick-tock. Finally, Allison spoke softly, voice raspy, almost to herself. I shouldn't have left him there. But at the time, I thought he was dead. I just wanted everything to disappear. Celia sat down, meeting her gaze. What do you mean by disappear, Allison? She bit her lip, hands trembling faintly. I pushed him into the lake. The room went deathly still. Celia leaned forward, voice low but firm. Tell us clearly, how did you do it? Allison closed her eyes, tears falling slowly down her cheeks. After he slumped, I shook and called him. He wasn't breathing. I was terrified of arrest, of them thinking I killed him. I wiped the table clean, then pulled him up. He was so heavy, I opened the deck door, wrapped him in a blanket, tied it with mooring line, then pushed him over the side. The wind was strong, spotlight sweeping the water. I saw him sink, slow, so slow. She paused, voice choking midway. I just stood watching, until the lake went flat again. Then I turned off the lights, left by the small dinghy. Lisa placed a Lake Mead map before her. Do you remember the location? Allison nodded, eyes on the paper. Buoy number 12. It's about 200 meters west of the dock, near the small rock wall. That night the wind was southeast, so his body drifted that way before sinking. She paused, looking up at Celia. If he's still there, then he never left the boat. That very afternoon, the Clark County Sheriff's Office sonar search and recovery team was mobilized. Lake Mead lay mirror-still under early summer sun. Specialized boats carrying modern sonar gear docked alongside divers and salvage experts. Celia stood on the command deck, eyes fixed on the western waters from the dock, where Allison had indicated. Ripples reflected pale blue sky. At 12 meters depth, the sonar screen showed echoes, faint shadows of rocks, moss, and amid them an odd shape, long and curved like a small boat hull. Hold here, the dive commander signaled. 2 black-suited divers, carrying underwater cameras, slipped silently into the lake. Everyone on deck watched via live feed. The water darkened below, fine silt clouding thick around flashlight beams. After minutes, one signaled, pointing to a half-buried, half-exposed dark shape under the mud. A small wooden boat hull, about 3 meters long, rotted frame, starboard side broken, covered in algae. As the camera panned inside the hold, all held their breath. In the boat's belly, mixed with sand and fish bones, lay a nearly intact human skeleton. On its side, arms still lightly crossed over the chest. Celia gripped the deck railing tightly. The image shook slightly, then sharpened as the diver approached. The light illuminated an object still draped over the skeleton, a fragment of gray coat, the left chest bearing a faded embroidered line. "R. Hale." No one spoke for several seconds. Celia bowed her head, feeling as if she could hear Carl Stevens' voice echoing from years ago. No one left the boat before he died. He had been right. The recovery operation continued throughout the afternoon. The body was brought to the surface in a containment bag. Every scrap of fabric and wood from the boat also collected. At sunset, as the black draped stretcher was lifted ashore, Lake Mead seemed to fall silent again, just as it had the first time it concealed that secret. Celia stood watching, the day's final red light reflecting in her eyes. Beside her, Lisa Vasquez said softly, 45 years, and finally he's come home. In the temporary command room, Celia opened the map, circling the location where the body was found. Under the words, buoy number 12, she added a note. Recovered 2008, per suspect confession. She sat still, thinking of the image of that man, the meticulous engineer, father of 5 children, who had left home on an ordinary evening and never returned. Now, thanks to the very confession of the woman who had once loved him, the truth had risen from the depths. That evening, upon returning to the detention center, Celia passed by Allison's cell. She sat leaning against the wall, the dim light casting on her gaunt face, eyes half closed. Hearing footsteps, she opened them slightly. "They found him, didn't they?" she asked. Celia nodded faintly. Allison gave a faint smile, a sad one mixed with relief. "I knew," she said, voice fading. "I've heard that water in my dreams for 40 years. Celia looked at her for a few seconds, then left, leaving behind the whistling wind through the long corridor and the cold, damp smell of the desert night. Somewhere out there, Lake Mead still rippled lightly, as if whispering thanks to someone for returning the truth it had kept hidden for nearly half a century. The Clark County Forensics Lab sat amid the industrial area south of Las Vegas, a gray concrete building without signage, where the final answers to old cases were often found in silence. That morning, Detective Celia Tran and Prosecutor Lisa Vasquez arrived early. On the stainless steel table, the bone containment bag was placed neatly, beside a thick file labeled "Recovered from Lake Mead, April 2008. Forensic pathologist Dr. Raymond Heller donned gloves, slowly unzipping the bag. The room's air was cold and thick, filled only with the scratch of pen on notepad. Inside the bag was a nearly intact skeleton, carefully reconstructed. On the left ring finger still clung a worn gold ring, engraved with M&R, 1948. Lisa held a photocopy of Robert Hale's marriage certificate, pointing to the notation "Martha and Robert, 1948, Dearborn, Michigan." She looked at Celia, nodding slightly. "No mistake." Dr. Heller removed his glasses, speaking deliberately. "The molars are intact, shape and position matching Hale's dental records provided by the family exactly. Bone structure indicates male, approximately 50 to 52 years old, height about 5'11", right on with the missing person's description. No doubt this is Robert Hale." Heller continued, pointing to the cervical vertebrae in the reconstruction model. "This is the most anomalous point. C2 and C3 vertebrae fractured with backward force, consistent with a strong pull or fall from height with high momentum. He may not have been dead when he fell from the deck. After the water impact, the neck snapped, and he sank quickly." Celia stood still. The picture she'd imagined of that night suddenly became chillingly real. Yellow lamplight, breaking water, heavy body plunging down, the lake closing as if no one had ever touched it. On the adjacent table, the biochemist presented results from tissue samples taken from the arm bone and residual marrow. "We detected traces of morphine and diacetylmorphine, hallmarks of heroin, still identifiable after over 40 years in a water environment. Concentration 3 times the normal lethal dose." He paused, pointing to the diagram. "This matches the 1963 forensics report on the Dean Ryle case exactly. Same heroin type, same levels, and with the confirmed injection mark on the left arm, it's clear the victim was injected while alive." Lisa Vasquez took notes, voice low. "So time of death?" Heller replied, "Based on decomposition level and isotope data, we estimate he died between 10 p.m. and midnight on November 22, 1963, perfectly aligning with when the Azure Star yacht's radio signal stopped." Celia exhaled softly, almost a sigh held back for months. Every piece fit. Confession, buoy location, DNA, now cause of death. All led to the same point, the Lake Mead night, and the woman named Allison Teague. That afternoon, the forensics report was sent to the Clark County Prosecutor's office. The first line in the summary read clearly, "Cause of death, cervical fracture and heroin overdose. Manner of death, homicide." With this conclusion, the file once marked "Suspicious Missing" was officially upgraded to second-degree murder. The old cold case storage was opened once more, the Hale 6345 evidence box placed beside the new file, this time with a red label, "Homicide, active." At police headquarters, Celia watched the technician finalize the evidence catalog. 2 wine glasses containing DNA from Hale and Teague, syringe with mixed DNA samples, hair strand and lipstick mark matching the suspect. Victim's body identified by dental records, wedding ring, and bone DNA. Suspect's confession matching buoy number 12 location and time of death. All sealed in a new evidence box, coded Hale Case, 2008 Physical Evidence Summary. As the forensics technician affixed the final seal, Lisa Vasquez looked at Celia, voice firm. With all this data, we're no longer at accident or negligence. This was deliberate, inject, clean, and dispose. 3 days later, the prosecutor's office filed supplemental charges with the Nevada Federal Court. Beyond the manslaughter count, the new indictment added a second item, in bold, Charge 2. Disposal and destruction of human remains. As the indictment was signed and approved, Celia stood by the window looking out at the hazy distant mountains, where sunset dyed the desert red. 45 years, 2 generations of police, one secret at the lake bottom, all now voiced by science. Everything Carl Stevens had suspected, written in his old notebook, was confirmed by fingerprints, DNA, and the truth rising from Lake Mead. Celia closed the file, her hand touching the cold lid of the evidence box. "It's over, Mr. Stevens," she whispered. "You were right." Outside, dusk settled over Las Vegas, and somewhere amid the barren rocks around the lake, desert wind blew long, like a belated reply from the man who had waited 45 years to be found. In May 2008, Las Vegas entered an early hot season. In the Clark County Prosecutor's Office, Lisa Vasquez sat amid stacks of towering documents on her desk, each file labeled red with Hale 6345, reopened 2008. After over 45 years, the Azure Star yacht disappearance had officially become a complete criminal case. Before her was an unbreakable chain of evidence, DNA, witnesses, body, confession, exhibits, all linked like a taut thread from 1963 to now. Lisa and Detective Celia Tran reviewed each section of the preliminary indictment. "We have Allison's DNA on the glass and syringe," Celia read slowly. "Hale's body identified by teeth, wedding ring and marrow analysis. Suspect's confession matches the body recovery location. And the scene shows cleaning traces consistent with evidence tampering." Lisa nodded, noting in the file margin. "Add to that, chain of custody, the evidence preservation chain, intact from 1963 to now. Every seal, signature, transfer logged, confirmed by scans and archives. No breaks or unauthorized openings." She flipped to the evidence catalog page. Original evidence box from Detective Carl Stevens, red wax seals, Hale 6345 code label. 1973 and 1986 inventories, 2008 DNA tests, all matched perfectly. This was what made this nearly half-century case special. Every piece preserved like a ship sealed by time, now returning to testify for itself. On May 14th, at a closed meeting between prosecution and forensics, Celia presented the evidence flow diagram from the 1963 yacht scene. Allison's confession to the 2008 body discovery at buoy 12. Each point connected by DNA samples, photos, and recorded statements. Lisa said concisely, "No longer hypothesis. This is a case with full basis for manslaughter and body disposal prosecution." 3 days later, the defense team led by David Coleman filed a counterargument with the court. Their main claim, the incident occurred in 1963, beyond Nevada's statute of limitations. But at the brief hearing, Lisa countered immediately. This case was never closed. The victim was listed as suspicious missing, not deceased, and evidence of crime, the body and DNA, was only discovered in 2008. By statute, the clock starts from new evidence date. Judge Eleanor Bates listened, then banged the gavel decisively. Motion denied. The state of Nevada versus Allison Teague case will proceed to prosecution. After the hearing, Celia stood in the courthouse hallway, watching noon sunlight stream through the glass. She recalled Detective Stevens' notebook note. No one left the boat before he died, and now, by law and science, she had proven him right. Inside, Lisa continued refining the nearly 40-page final indictment, detailing every exhibit. At the top of the first page, the title in all caps: State of Nevada vs. Allison Teague, Homicide and Destruction of Human Remains. The thick file was bound in black cover, including the full evidence chain of custody. Each page bore the Clark County Evidence Room verification stamp. As Lisa signed the final name, she paused, then said softly to Celia, 45 years, and finally, this file has found its reader. On May 26, 2008, the prosecution officially filed the full indictment with Clark County Criminal Court. The court's filing department confirmed receipt of 312 pages of documents and 14 original exhibits. The internal report sent that day bore the concise title, Vegas Yacht Case. Active prosecution. In June, the official announcement was made. Arraignment set for August 2008. Local news carried small headlines: 1963 yacht case reopened. 68-year-old suspect faces manslaughter charges. And at Lake Mead, waves still lapped gently around Buoy 12, where the secret once dormant for nearly half a century now stood as living evidence, ready to step into the light of justice. On August 12, 2008, Clark County Criminal Court was packed. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting pale beams on the wooden benches where press, locals, and law students crowded to watch. At the front table, prosecutor Lisa Vasquez arranged her thick stack of documents, cover emblazoned in bold red, State of Nevada versus Allison Teague, Homicide and Destruction of Human Remains. At the opposite table, Allison Teague, now 68, sat quietly in a light gray jail-issued suit, hands folded on her lap. Her face was pale, but still held the strangely elegant beauty of the woman who had once ensnared two men. Beside her, defense attorney David Coleman whispered something, but Allison didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the polished wooden table, where her aged reflection stared back faintly. As Judge Eleanor Bates entered, everyone rose. The gavel banged 3 times, opening the trial broadcast live statewide. Clark County Court convenes the trial of State of Nevada versus Allison Teague regarding the death of engineer Robert Hale at Lake Mead, November 1963. Prosecutor Lisa opened first, her voice clear, each word like a nail driven home. Your Honor, today we speak not just of a death, but of 45 years of silence. This case was buried under lake water until science and justice brought it to light. She held up the black and white photos, flashes popping on the large projection screen behind, Azure Star Yacht Cabin, 2 wine glasses, syringe, light leather chair, and a third photo. The ring engraved M and R, 1948, glinting on a bony finger. Everything you see, Lisa said, is truth sealed in an evidence box for nearly half a century. The first witness called was Frank Doyle, the 1963 yacht dock attendant, now over 80. He hobbled to the stand on a cane, voice trembling but clear. I saw them together that night, Mr. Hale and the brunette girl. She smiled at me as they boarded. When prosecution showed a 1963 photo of Allison, he nodded without hesitation. That's her. Defense had no objection, only silent notes. After Doyle, DNA technician Megan Alvarez testified. She detailed the modern tests identifying Allison's DNA on both glass and syringe, explaining how samples were preserved intact for over 40 years. As the matching DNA images appeared on screen, the gallery murmured. Lisa said, "Science doesn't lie, Your Honor. It only remembers." Next was forensic pathologist Raymond Heller, who confirmed the body as Robert Hale's. He projected the skeleton diagram, pointing to the broken neck and heroin traces in marrow. Cause of death: cervical fracture and high-dose heroin shock. Left arm injection proves administered by another. Defense could only ask, could the victim have fallen accidentally? Heller replied firmly, no. Wounds indicate pushed from behind. Prosecution's presentation spanned 2 days. They exhibited the full evidence chain. 1963, sealed original box, Rolleiflex film photos, forensics reports, 2008 sonar map, Allison's taped confession. As the recording played, the elderly woman's trembling voice. I pushed him into the lake. I was so scared, I just wanted to disappear. The courtroom fell deathly silent. Allison sat head bowed, hands clasped tight. On the third day's afternoon, Lisa showed footage of the buoy 12 recovery. On screen, the algae-covered small boat hull emerged slowly, then the gray coat with embroidered R. Hale. As that image appeared, Allison broke into sobs, shoulders shaking. Attorney Coleman placed a hand on her shoulder, but she brushed it off, choking, I don't want to see it anymore. I've seen it too many times already. In defense, Coleman didn't deny Allison's presence at the scene, but argued it was an accident, no intent to kill. He told the court, my client had no motive for murder. She was a young woman scared, addicted, and confused. She made a mistake, but not one warranting intentional crime. Lisa rebutted, she didn't just fear it, she cleaned, erased traces, and dumped the body in the lake. That's no longer fear, that's choice. At afternoon recess, sides were allowed to negotiate. Allison sat quietly in a closed room with her attorney and prosecutor. Lisa placed the agreement on the table, plea deal. Involuntary manslaughter and disposal of a body. If pleading guilty, she'd face 10 years instead of maximum 25. The room silent for long. Allison eyed the paper, lips quivering. I don't want to die in prison, she said softly. But I don't want to lie anymore. The next morning, as court reconvened, Judge Bates asked, Miss Allison Teague, do you plead guilty, per the agreement? She looked up, eyes red-rimmed, voice hoarse. I do. I was there. I pushed him into the lake. The gavel banged in the courtroom. Everyone fell silent. After 45 years, the Lake Mead yacht case finally closed with the very admission from the only survivor of that fateful 1963 night. On the morning of August 20th, 2008, Room 4 of Clark County Criminal Court was packed, but deathly quiet. Early sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting pale beams on the prosecution benches. Below, Allison Teague sat still in her gray prison uniform, soft cuffs on her wrists. Her face was gaunt, wrinkles deeply etched, eyes dry after days of trial tears. In the front row, Martha Hale, Robert Hale's elderly widow, now nearly 80, sat between two children, hands trembling as she clutched a white handkerchief. As Judge Eleanor Bates's gavel sounded, everyone knew 45 years of waiting had reached its end. The judge read slowly, voice ringing clear in the silent room. Miss Allison Teague, 68, has pleaded guilty to 2 counts, involuntary manslaughter and destruction of evidence, concealment of human remains. The court notes the defendant's cooperation in helping authorities locate the victim and confirm the truth. She poses no further danger to society, and age is considered a mitigating factor. However, the court also notes that her actions caused a family to lose a husband and father for over 40 years. All eyes turned to Allison. She lifted her head, lips quivering, voice raspy as wind. I know I can't ask forgiveness. I only hope he's at peace, and his family knows the truth before I die. No one replied, only soft sobs from the back rows. The judge looked down at the sentence, banging the gavel a second time. Considering all factors, the court sentences the defendant to 6 years imprisonment, reduced to 2 years due to advanced age and health condition. Upon release, the defendant will be on supervised probation for 18 months. The sound echoed quietly in the room. Allison closed her eyes briefly, then nodded as if finally able to breathe. Officers escorted her to her feet, while across the way, Martha Hale bowed her head, hands clenching as she watched the woman who had left her life hanging on an unanswered question. Lisa Vasquez approached, placing a small box gently in her hands. This is his, she said. Inside was an old silver watch and wedding ring engraved and R, 1948. Mrs. Martha opened the lid, gazing intently at the items that had lain underwater nearly half a century. She smiled tremulously, a smile of pain and relief. He's home now, she said softly. Las Vegas papers the next day blared uniformly. Lake Mead 1963 file officially closed after 45 years. Last woman on yacht pleads guilty. The Azure Star story flooded national news, not just for its tragedy, but as Nevada's first case solved via DNA analysis from pre-1970 sealed evidence. At the Cold Case Unit office, Celia Tran and her team received commendations from the department. On the wall hung a framed black and white photo of the Azure Star yacht taken by Carl Stevens in 1963. Below it was a brass plaque engraved with the words, "Hail Case, Solved, 2008. Dedicated to Detective Carl Stevens, whose words guided us through time. No one left the boat before he died." At the press conference, Lisa Vasquez said concisely, "This is not just a case closed, but a model for every long stagnant file. Science may move slowly, but justice never sleeps." That afternoon, Celia drove alone to Lake Mead. The desert wind blew dry and cold, the water reflecting the brilliant orange sunset. She stopped at the old dock, where buoy number 12 was now just a faint mark on the surface. In her hand was a small photo of Robert Hale, smiling beside his yacht, taken before that fateful night. Celia placed the photo at the water's edge, letting the wind carry it away. On the lake, small waves spread and merged. She said softly, as if to herself, as if to the spirit still lingering, "He's come home, and the lake has given back what it held for 45 years. The sun sank behind the red mountains, the final light casting on the shimmering water, like the silver hull still somewhere in the depths, silent, closing a long chapter that Las Vegas would never forget. In October 2008, the Las Vegas Police Department's Cold Case Unit office was lit up for many nights in a row. In the small room covered with files and photo boards, Detective Celia Tran was finalizing the technical summary report for the Hale 63/45 case. The once unsolvable file, now a model investigation for the entire state of Nevada. On the screen, each item appeared: forensic preservation, DNA analysis, evidence chain integrity. Celia read the opening paragraph again. The Hale 63/45 file, Lake Mead, 1963, was resolved in August 2008, after 45 years dormant. DNA evidence extracted from over 4-decade-old stored exhibits remained intact, proving the value of Clark County evidence room's sealing and storage protocols. She typed into the conclusion section, from the 2 wine glasses, syringe hair strand, to the wedding ring and recovered body. All exhibits were preserved to standard, eligible for re-examination with modern STR-DNA technology. Chain of custody integrity confirmed at 100%, with no seal violations or document losses. Beside her, technician Megan Alvarez, the first to discover the DNA match, was reorganizing the final samples into the preservation cabinet. Each bag received a new label, noting "Analyzed 2008, retained for record." Megan smiled, saying quietly, "If not for Mr. Rekin, would or Mr. Stevens keeping those wax seals intact, this case might have been lost forever." Celia nodded, looking toward the black and white photo on the wall. Detective Carl Stevens standing on the yacht dock in 1963, his eyes gazing at the water, the Azure Star gleaming silver in the morning sun behind him. The final report spanned 127 pages, including all forensics documents, DNA sequences, crime scene photos, witness statements, verdict, and post-review files. On the last page, Celia handwrote a short line: "No case truly dies. It only sleeps until someone awakens it with patience, and with the belief that justice has no expiration date." 2 weeks later, the FBI officially received a full copy of the Hale case file into the National Cold Case Investigation Training Program. At the Quantico meeting, the report was presented as a model study on long-term evidence preservation and next-generation DNA application. On the opening slide, the simple title appeared: Case Study, The Lake Mead Investigation, from 1963 to 2008. Below it was Celia Tran's caption: "One piece of evidence, if preserved properly, can speak for the dead." The report was incorporated into the official curriculum of the 2009 federal training course, simulating the technical process, extracting DNA from old evidence, STR analysis, seal checks, and evidence continuity verification. Photos of the Azure Star yacht, sonar images of the body discovery, and the Buoy 12 map became famous illustrations in U.S. forensics. At the same time, the real yacht, the Azure Star, was transferred to the Hoover Dam Storage Facility, the state's historical evidence archive. Before storage, the tech team applied a protective coating to prevent wood rot, reinforcing the cabin frame with steel. On the hull, the silver lettering Azure Star still bore a small chip in the A, etched by time. A small plaque was mounted beside it, Azure Star, Lake Mead, 1963. Exhibit in the Hale case, sealed for storage per Clark County court order. Celia stood watching as the boat was craned onto its storage platform, late afternoon sun glinting off the old paint. 45 years underwater, she said softly to Megan. And now it can rest here. Megan nodded, just like the case itself. In November, the Cold Case Unit sent the summary report to the Nevada Department of Justice. In the final evaluation, the unit head wrote, "The Hale file is a benchmark for combining traditional investigation and modern forensics. It proves science can revive justice even after half a century." On the last day before closing the case, Celia signed the completion log. The final line bolded on screen, case number Hale 6345. Status shelved. She saved the file, closed the dossier, then stood looking around the room. Once cluttered with documents, now just warm lamplight, and the original evidence box, neatly in the glass cabinet. On the box lid, Carl Stevens' old lead seal still bore faint scratches. Celia placed her hand on it, saying softly, "You were right, Carl. No case truly dies." That afternoon, she drove to Lake Mead. Desert wind blew gently, the water mirror still, reflecting the fiery sunset. On shore, buoy number 12 had been replaced, but in the lake's heart, somewhere, the old Azure Star's wood fragments lay quiet as witnesses to an era. Celia gazed afar, then turned back, getting into her car. The window closed, the only sound left was the wind whispering over the water, where justice, after 45 years, had finally found its harbor. In December 2008, a major headline appeared on the front page of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, "Vegas 1963 Mystery Finally Solved. Lake Mead Yields Its Secret." After 45 years. The news quickly spread across America, then beyond borders. National TV stations aired special segments on the case once buried by time, now closed, thanks to a hair strand, a wine glass, and the persistence of those who wouldn't let justice sleep forgotten. In days from Los Angeles to New York, Robert Hale's name reappeared on evening news, this time not as an unsolved enigma, but as a symbol of faith in truth. In the small town by Lake Mead, where the Azure Star once moored, residents were stunned, mixed with moved. They had grown up with the missing engineer story, a local legend retold for decades like a ghostly rumor. Some believed he fled the country, others said he was killed for defense tech secrets. Now, with the official news out, the truth silenced them all. Turns out, the tragedy lay not in conspiracy, but in a mistake by two lost souls in the night. "I saw that boat's lights in 1963, old dock attendant Frank Doyle told reporters. "I never thought I'd wait till 80 to know what really happened." News praised the case as a milestone in U.S. forensics. The FBI and Cold Case Unit were lauded for turning dusty files into lessons for new investigators. A trade magazine wrote, "DNA tech is just the tool. What makes the Hale case epic is the patience and faith of its successors." The dusty Azure Star photo, shown in rookie training classes, came with the caption, "Every piece of evidence has a voice, if we know how to listen." Amid the media wave, the Hale family chose quiet. Early January 2009, they held a small memorial on Lake Mead, right where the search team had recovered the body. The morning lake was so still, everyone could see their reflections below. Mrs. Martha Hale, silver-haired in a long coat, stood on the old dock, where her husband had left that evening. In her hand was the wedding ring and silver watch returned after trial. She released both into the water, the metal tinkling softly on the surface, then sinking into the clear depths. "He's back with the place that took him from me," she said, voice calm and warm. Beside her, Detective Celia Tran and Lisa Vasquez stood silently. They said nothing, just gazed at the endless lake, where the rising sun trailed a pink streak across the sky. A few birds wheeled overhead, waves lapping gently at the dock pilings. On shore, reporters kept silent, letting the memorial unfold in dignity. As the rite ended, Mrs. Martha turned, shaking Celia's hand, eyes glistening. "Thank you. Without you I'd have died never knowing where he was," Celia replied softly. "No one deserves to carry that question a lifetime." That afternoon, as everyone left, the lake returned to its old calm. Buoy number 12 still floated mid-water, reflecting blood-red sunset. Beneath the deep, azure star's wood fragments lay still, no longer evidence, but memory of a story fully told. That evening, local news replayed the ceremony's final images. The camera panned slowly over the water, where next morning's dawn light shimmered like a mirror. The anchor's voice closed. 45 years passed, from jazz night on the Azure Star to bones found at Lake Mead's bottom. Justice arrived, late but whole. Evidence never lies. It only waits for those who know how to listen. The final image faded in soft morning light. Vast water mirroring the first sun, flat, serene, as if Lake Mead itself exhaled a long breath after half a century's silence. And with that wave, the 1963 yacht case became new legend. Not mystery, but proof that no matter how long time buries it, truth always finds its way to the surface. The 1963 Lake Mead story offers us many very real-life lessons in America today. First, evidence doesn't lie if we know how to preserve and listen to it. A hair strand with intact medulla on the Azure Star, lipstick on the glass rim, luminol traces around the table, the sealed chain of custody from Hale 6345, then the 2008 STR DNA SCOTUS match, all remind that meticulousness, discipline, and transparency in work, from storing receipts, emails to medical records, will protect us and our community in the long run. Second, Detective Carl Stevens' handwritten note, "No one left the boat before he died," shows intuition plus discipline can outpace the era at work. Write down thoughts, hypotheses, event milestones. A few clear lines today can be the compass for those who come after. Third, Allison Teague's confession of panic, cleaning body disposal, is a costly mirror amid today's opioid overdose crisis. When someone passes out, call 911 immediately. Many states have Good Samaritan overdose immunity, protecting callers. Delay or cover-up turns accident into crime. Fourth, the Buoy 12 detail and sonar team, finding the skeleton in the small boat hull, remind us of collaborative tech's power. Family, local police, labs, FBI, no organization solves it alone. In community, proactively join neighborhood watch networks, naloxone CPR training classes, or volunteer searches for the missing. Finally, the quiet lakeside memorial and returning the watch, wedding ring to the Hale family, remind us to value healing rituals, closing properly, apologizing, compensating, remembering, helps community move forward. 45 years past, evidence doesn't lie, only waits for those who know how to listen. In American life today, that's an invitation to live responsibly, courageously, and persistently. If you believe justice can be awakened even after half a century, hit subscribe to join us exploring more mysteries, thoughts sunk in oblivion. Thank you for watching the Lake Mead story to the end. See you in the next video, where another truth rises from time's shadows.